Hello, all. Thank you for clicking that play button and joining us. I will say there's no easy way to introduce this man that's joining us on episode 56. Eric Horn was a friend of a friend. We were introduced a while ago, but now is a dear friend, becoming one, and it makes so much sense. Just the aura he spreads off. His story is so inspirational, so compelling. He knows it so well, coming from both the tech world, creative world, the fact that I meshed together from a young age, got it from his parents, but just has these different experiences that lead up to just having this unique storytelling aspect of his life. He's writing his own book, but Eric, just a creative video technologist in full, a director, a producer, now focusing on live stream and remote production a lot, especially with the state of the world in 2020, but super interesting. There's so many ways to go about introducing him, but I'll let the interview, more of a conversation, do that. So enjoy this one. Hope you get a ton out of it, and see you soon.
I have a dream.
It's one small step for man.
I am the greatest.
You want something, go get it. Period.
To start off, I'm here with Eric Horn. It is awesome to have you. And I usually don't go the formal route with introductions, but I think this will be the best way because you have such a breadth of experience. So with the most profound LinkedIn timeline, I'm going to go with the bio, in which you're the executive producer and partner at Direct Narrative, your own video production agency. And you've been immersed in tech, media, all of that since a young age, and been a consultant for people like iHeartMedia, Microsoft, WIREWAX, just really making your way up the ranks through repetition, through curiosity, through passion. So from someone who's in this realm and learning more and more, and someone who, Dream Big and Co. is around this sphere, we got the sort of like the pinnacle here in a way of someone who's been around the ring. So I appreciate you coming on a ton.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Happy to chat.
Yeah. And the first way I wanted to go with, it's more of the ancient way of communication, is writing. I know on LinkedIn, you're starting a new series with After the Virus. I would love for you to talk about that a little bit and your roots with writing, because I didn't know you used to, but now you're re-entering into it because this pandemic sort of brings people to their roots. So I know you're doing just that.
Yeah, it's funny. I've always enjoyed writing because you get drafts. When you're speaking to somebody like this, you have to kind of nail it as you say it, or at least there's like that little bit of pressure that you should try and nail it or like get it right as you say it. And that's always given me a little bit of anxiety, not a ton, but a little bit, healthy amount.
Yeah.
And so I've always enjoyed being able to like jot down some ideas and then refine and then add to it and then refine and then walk away and then revisit and refine again. And, like when I was 16, this random woman walked into my social studies class and told us that there was going to be this essay writing competition for potential Asian studies majors. And the winner would get to go to China for 3 weeks. And, I wasn't like the best student. I was like a solid B. I mean, I got A's in a lot of stuff, but like I also got like the occasional B or the occasional C when I wasn't interested.
Yeah.
And it was just harder for me to focus. I was like an ADD kid. But when they came in and they said that there was a trip to China at stake, I was like, all right, you got my attention. And I ended up writing an essay. I was one of like a few thousand people in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, that entered this competition with this nonprofit. And I ended up getting shortlisted and then getting brought in for an interview and getting asked for teacher recommendations, and ultimately ended up getting selected and got to go to China for 3 weeks because of an essay I wrote. And, ever since then, I've always understood like the power of written communication. Yeah. And I think it's created a big ripple in like business as well.
Yeah. That's like, I'm realizing more and more that same thing of how important copy and copywriting is. Like you especially know with media. But I was super curious because I saw you had that experience in China, and that answers the question of how you got into it. And what were some cool experiences over there that shifted your perspective, whether it be with tech or media or just life in general?
I mean, something that's kind of resonant now looking back, something that just kind of puts the world in perspective. Like, I grew up 20 minutes outside of New York City. I've grown up around diversity my entire life, and I guess I've to some extent taken it for granted, the fact that I've had friends from every kind of like creed and background. And I remember one of the other kids that was selected was like this black dude from the Bronx who was like, had never left the Bronx before. He was amazing dude. And we went to China and we're on this trip and we're at the Great Wall. And there's 16 of us. 16 students were selected out of the tri-state area. Mm. And I'm walking next to Mark. And as we're walking along the wall, like, for those that don't know, I'm 32. I went when I was 16, so that's 16 years ago. So China wasn't the world power that it's becoming today or is today. At that time, China was still very much a developing nation in the truest sense. They've done quite a bit in the last 15 years. And the Great Wall in particular was very much like the Disneyland of China. It was a place that, like, everybody from anywhere in the country saves up their entire life in hopes that they get to go visit this great accomplishment that their people created. And you get these families from these small farm towns that don't have internet or cable TV, literally, have grown up their entire life just like work in the field and understanding maybe a little bit of Chinese history and their family lineage and their family trades. And that's their entire life and their entire existence. And there's nothing bigger than that outside of their world. That's their world. Their world is that small. And as we're walking on the Great Wall, there's all these families that came from these remote villages and haven't really been out much, haven't, to use like the shitty expression, they're kind of under a rock. Like, they're very sheltered from the rest of the world. These people would see Mark, who's like this 6'4" black man, like very dark, swagger from the Bronx, looks like very, very markedly different from anyone in the Chinese population.
It's a completely different, just besides like race, it's just a completely different person coming. It's just like a foreign entity in a way, just because their world is all like their family.
Well, so the crazy thing, and what I was trying to get at in like kind of a long-winded way, is that people reacted, and the reactions were one of two kind of reactions. There was a reaction of curiosity, where people would walk up to him and touch him, like walk up to him and like pat his hand or like touch his forearm or something.
Wow.
But like they would do it as if, like, again, this is a really shitty analogy, and forgive me if I have a potty mouth, but
yeah, you're good.
It would be like the same way, like if you had the opportunity to pet a tiger and you like pet it, but kind of like pull away because you're like a little bit terrified, but a little bit curious. That was one of the reactions. The other reaction was like, you're walking on this pathway that's maybe like 30 feet wide or something. And we'd be walking on one side and you'd see people coming like this way, and they would all of a sudden drift to the other side of the wall the second they saw him. And they would try to maintain as much distance as possible. Like the reaction that you'd have if you saw a bear while you were camping in the forest.
Yeah.
And
that was 30 feet wide, the wall.
I don't quote me on 30 feet. I mean, it's different widths at different sections of the wall.
Yeah.
But like, where we were, the part that we walked was pretty wide. wasn't super wide, but it was pretty wide.
The fact that people are still trying to get away and they're that wide, yeah.
And so we had a tour guide with us, and I remember Mark went up to the tour guide and was like, all right, man, what's going on? Like, I'm getting freaked out because some of these people are touching me, and I don't really like to be touched.
Mm.
And some of these people are clearly scared of me. So what's going on? And the tour guide was like, listen, Mark, you must understand these people have never left their villages before. They've never seen a black person before. You're the first black person they've ever seen. They haven't even seen black people in movies or television because they don't have movies or television in their village. They come from a poor farming village where they don't watch TV. They don't have internet. All they know is their day-to-day existence, which is the farm and the family and maybe their friends in the village. Mm. And so when they see you, they don't know what to think. Some of them think maybe you're just like a really big Chinese person that's dirty. And so they're touching you to see if the dirt will come off.
Yeah.
And other people think that maybe you're a monster. And so they stay away. And Mark started tearing up and was like, what do you mean they think I'm a monster? Like, I'm just.
Rightly so. Yeah.
He's like, I'm just a person. And, that was one of those moments where, like, coming from New York City, the concept of somebody having never seen or known that black people exist is like, so the culture shock going there 15 years ago and realizing that, like, the world, to us, the world feels really small and we feel like we know a lot about the world. But like 50% of the internet, 50% of the world population is still not connected to the internet.
Is it that substantial? I did not know. Wow.
It's that substantial. I heard that stat. I told you I've been working on this programming for the UNGA, and I actually just heard somebody talking about in one of the panels that we produced, someone from...
For context, United Nations General Assembly, correct?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, and so, they're talking about, like, the effect of COVID on global population, and they're saying, like, that the tech disparity is creating problems as well. Like, there's a lot of places where e-learning isn't an option because they don't have internet access, they don't have the technology easily available to become connected, and so places like that are hit a lot harder than we are because, we can still hop on Zoom and have a conversation like this, and we take it for granted. Like, this is the status quo for us, but there is a whole lot of world out there that doesn't have what we have, doesn't necessarily miss it because they don't necessarily even know.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some people would say they're better off, but that to me, that was the first moment in my, like, my coming of age at 16, having grown up in like a suburb that was just very middle class, right outside of New York. To then go to a place like China and see how other people live that is like so drastically different. Not even like, it's not the difference between growing up in Long Island versus the Bronx. It's not the difference between like growing up in Texas. It's a difference that you can't really fathom until you see it. And you realize that, like, at the time when I visited, there were still women with bound feet there.
Yeah. It's so the timing is unreal that you brought that up, because a major theme for me this week has been going outside oneself, because I feel as though a lot of people have these small worldly problems that they get consumed in, and the ability to like use tech is amazing, but if you travel outside yourself, whether it be a hike on a mountain or you in China when you were 16, like it broadens your world and you realize there's a sense of gratitude, respect of all those things. And there's a couple of Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's important for us to know how minuscule we are
Yeah,
in
yeah.
in the great picture of the planet.
That's a perfect word to use. And there were so many routes I wanted to go down. We'll go down the two I had because it will make more sense after. But like, what drew you into like tech and media? Was it did this experience influence that in any way, or is this just a part of a life experience, or was it something else?
My cousin, who's 10 years senior to me, has always been a director for as long as I can remember.
Hmm.
And growing up around him, being kind of like an older brother, and my grandfather, who had some connections to the film industry back in Israel before he immigrated here, um, there was a lot of like, my dad was a tech savvy person, and I think between those influences, my mom was an artsy person, still is. She had studied interior design and stuff, so like I think I had a lot of creative people around me and a lot of tech savvy people around me, and I immediately understood that cameras can tell stories just as well as a pen and paper, and just as well as a person at a bonfire.
Hmm.
And I think
Completely agree.
storytelling is something that fascinates me. And again, I think going back to China, there are a lot of stories that we're not hearing.
Mm.
And I think the thing that initially was my catalyst or my motivation for wanting to be a filmmaker and wanting to be involved in media was just trying to tell people stories that are getting neglected. Um, like I remember on that same trip, every time we would go to a tourist site, there would be a lot of kids that would come up to our bus and ask us for plastic bottles. And, they would return those plastic bottles for recycling and get a little bit of scratch to survive. But I kept noticing that a lot of these kids were mutilated. And it was really, really disheartening to see these young kids consistently with amputations and like all sorts of mutilations. And I went to our tour guide and I was like, what's the deal? Is this because medical here is like not that fine tuned, or like is this what's going on? Like, why is there such a high
Hmm.
rate of these kids that are beggars and mutilated? And he was just like, you've heard of the one child policy in China, the population control.
Hmm.
At a certain point, it got expanded to two, but the ramifications, if you violated that policy, were still very severe. If you had a third child, you would get penalized very, very, like very, very harshly.
Hmm.
So what would happen is that like if somebody did get pregnant with another child, um, in many cases they would either be doing like underground abortions, which were super sketchy and a lot of times resulted in the pregnant, the mother passing. And other times they would try to just hide the baby. And unfortunately, in a lot of these small villages, it's hard to hide a baby from your whole community. Like you can't really, maybe when baby's really young, you can or something, but as the child gets older, it becomes a lot harder to pretend like that person doesn't exist. And so usually they'll hide the pregnancy until the baby's born. And then at a certain point, when they feel like they're at risk of being punished or being found out, they'll oftentimes abandon these kids in alleyways and outside of their homes.
Wow.
And there are these like mafia type agencies that will uh, fly through these neighborhoods in vans looking for these abandoned kids that they then take in, bring to a warehouse, and give like the bare minimum of subsistence to. And essentially start pimping them out as beggars. They drop them at tourist sites on a daily basis, and they mutilate them to make them more sympathetic.
Mm.
And like that, I think was one of the first things that I wanted to pursue as a documentary. And I came back here and I actually pitched it to Morgan Spurlock, and there was like interest from one of the producers at his company, but they were just like, look, this is a cool idea, but you're going to need to go there with like a private militia, because if you get found out, you won't leave the country alive.
Yeah, I do remember you bringing this up, our first conversation ever. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's something that like I still think about it a lot, because
yeah, how do you not? That's profound.
it's like, I mean, there's so much stuff in this world that we should be addressing, and I don't even think there are so many activists, and I don't even think that we're not even tackling like a large percentage of the problems here in the States, let alone scratching the surface of our societal problems outside of this country.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I like the aspect of the storytelling you brought up with video, because it adds a sense of empathy that people can really, they should have right now. There was one film, I really wish I knew the name top of mind, but it showed how kids would travel, takes them 4 to 6 hours to travel to school. And they went through, there's a place in Argentina, in Africa. I can look it up on my phone what the film name was, but it's just like stuff like that. I thought of that when you brought up your idea with this and your experience in China with that sort of that world, because it showed that kids, like my little brother would travel to school, like parents drive them 10 minutes, easy. These kids travel on horse and it takes them 3 hours one way.
Yeah.
And people, I guess I can put it in the description of what the film name is, because it'll come back to me after. But yeah, for that reason, film's powerful. So I think the next route I was going to go was this aspect of storytelling appealed to you in many ways. And then you had this like combination of your mom and dad, which I didn't know, of like creative but tech. So like your bio, is that the reason your bio is like creative video specialist, director, producer, and you focus on these other things? And can you talk about what steps led you down to where you are, and like how different experiences shaped your sword of being that techie but also that creative? Because that is a difficult mix, to have both sides. That's sort of like an adjacent skill that brings a lot to the table.
I mean, a lot of it was kind of luck and happenstance and some hard work. I mean, you know, definitely super lucky that I got a really early start with TV and film, and like had people putting cameras in my hands when I was really young and just took to it. And my dad always liked to take things apart and put them back together, whether it was like the first computer that he had. We used to go to computer shows together and like buy DVD drives or CD drives and like hard drives and motherboards and like put computers together. Wow. I think doing that kind of stuff really young just made me good at thinking through how tech works and like understanding the relationship between different pieces of technology. And that's just a skill set that I've continued to kind of hone over the years in my professional and personal endeavors. And, you know, I think where I'm at now, where I'm kind of blending my love for storytelling and my love for tech, is just a combination of like going down the path of going to film school and learning a lot about storytelling and learning about what ingredients make a good story and how do you show that with picture, and then, you know, being involved in a number of productions and getting to shadow my cousin for some time, and working in a few different creative professions, and then kind of getting an opportunity to work on the tech side as well.
Yeah.
It's been happenstance that like one thing has led to another, you know, my cousin got me a gig doing freelance video editing work for an entertainment marketing agency. They hired me out of school. And then when I was ready to leave that agency, I was actually going to take a job doing photo and video for a bar in Greece, in the Greek islands.
Wow,
And,
that'd been awesome.
and I booked a flight, and my friend was like, hey, there's a job as a media manager at this television network. And I already put in a good word for you. You got to go in for the interview before you leave. And like, just at least have a conversation with them. Otherwise, you're going to make me look bad. And I was like, all right, fine, dude. I'll have a conversation, but like, I'm probably not going to take it. I'm probably not even going to consider it because I'm like set. I'm going to the Greek islands for the summer.
Yeah.
And then I went in there and they offered me like twice what I was making at my entertainment marketing agency job. And so then I ended up in TV and like on the tech side of it or the organizational side of it. And then I got poached by one of the tech vendors that I was working with in that job. So I think it's been,
Let's see.
what's the saying that like success is when preparation
Oh, yeah.
meets opportunity or something like that?
Exactly that. Yeah.
I've definitely tried to be prepared as much as possible and to be, you know, as wide-eyed and excited as I can be about opportunities. I've tried my best to not let any pass me by, or like at least not to turn my back or ignore what's right in front of me. And I think a lot of people get stuck in this concept of what they want to be or what they should be, and don't always look at the opportunities that are in front of them that could be amazing. Like there's always a lot to be learned and a lot of growth that could be had.
Yeah.
So even if you do something for a year and find out you don't like it, you'll probably still take something from that experience with you when you continue on.
Yeah, exactly that. I think it's important to have your sail set in a way to know what your purpose is and to or to like have a map to know where you're going. But a lot of the time, like the universe doesn't work in that way of just the structured way in which we think. And I was going to ask you, because now you've gotten to the point, I think, and as people get older, the priorities get more refined. Was it that early on you said yes to a lot because the opportunities were there and you wanted to try different things and you wanted to capitalize? And if so, like, how are you balancing now the aspect of saying no with capitalizing on opportunities by saying yes? Is it just knowing yourself really well, or is it like your priorities are so set in stone now that you won't go astray from your values? And we'll go back to other things, but that was just one question I wanted to ask.
I think a lot of it is tuning into your gut. And that's something that like I've had a lot of harsh reminders in my life when I haven't tuned into my gut, or when I've ignored my gut because I've been distracted by like shiny lights or technology or girls or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important for us to stay tuned into like the voice, you know, that voice in your head that's like, maybe this isn't right, is generally more intuitive than you think. And on the flip side of that, when that voice in your head is kind of like, this could be interesting, explore it, lean in. Even if you're a little bit anxious, a little bit scared, like I truly believe that all experience is good experience. And like,
Yeah.
it all builds character, and it's all stuff that you can, it's all additive. So like, as you accumulate different types of experience, I think every single job or gig I've done, I've had some sort of positive takeaway. Even when it's been like a really shitty boss or like a really hard work culture, you know, or like an unforgiving task, or, you know, whatever the case is, even when I've thought it was horrible, time has always proven that there was a purpose for that kind of moment in my life.
Yeah.
And there was something that could have been taken away.
And that's what I mean by the universe kind of conspires in your favor in different ways. And it's probably as well, like you had a great perspective in seeing those opportunities or those experiences as opportunities. You can't, like, the pessimistic mindset will never progress one forward. So there's definitely that aspect to it. But the other thing I was going to mention now is there's this recent uptick in the fact that there can be internet widely available to all. And the fact that before you brought up that only 50% of people in the world have access to internet, but now you have Starlinks from SpaceX being launched so that internet can be provided to all. What do you think will be, because you're someone very much in this field, so I like very much trusted source and opinion. What do you think it'll be like when all get access to it, and how that can help decentralize a lot of the world, I guess, just plain and simply. And there was a great quote by Naval, I'll bring up real quick. He said, as of now, there's 7 billion people in the world, and I hope one day that there can be 7 billion companies. So I think that just notion of decentralization, I appreciate that with the light. New York City's getting dark. That decentralization of things will be beautiful, but there's always a con to a pro. So as you who are like in the tech realm, but also media, and you see all this happening and the great work with SpaceX, but also the acceleration with the world going forward, what is your take on all of that?
I think that the internet is the best and worst thing in the world.
Perfectly said.
and we're incredibly fortunate to have the amount of information that we have at our fingertips, but we also have that same amount of misinformation at our fingertips, and that's dangerous. It's also dangerous for people to walk around thinking that they can get any information at any moment, that they can know everything, that they can be the all-knowing by just like having an iPhone. And I think that culturally, we've seen how the internet has had some really positive effects on society, obviously in like the medical field and in research and in a lot of those kinds of fields. The internet has helped tremendously bridging gaps and closing distances and sharing knowledge of people that are trying to change the world for the better. We've also seen, some really stupid trends. Some are fun and stupid, and some are like dangerous and stupid, right?
Yeah.
My biggest concern is that there's a lot of cultures that aren't ready for the internet. And when you all of a sudden drop that type of something of that magnitude into a culture that doesn't necessarily have as much understanding of technology or what they're looking at. I mean, maybe you would agree with me, but like, I think we already see it in some of the older generations. Maybe, I don't know how tech savvy your parents are, or if you still have living grandparents, and I apologize, I'm not trying to pry into that.
Yeah.
If you show somebody of retirement age right now something on the internet, there's a lot of people who like, they didn't have the internet when they were a kid, and they look at the internet now, and they don't know necessarily how to fact check or how to differentiate. Like, so many of the older generation don't even understand Photoshop as a concept.
Exactly.
And so when you get into a situation where like all of these people are now looking at all this stuff, it's really a little bit unnerving to think that, I think we need to, it's important for people to get connected, and it's important for this kind of technology, I think, to slowly extend into other parts of the world. But I also think that it's really important that we have like a healthy amount of respect and hesitation. Like we need to give it pause as well.
Yeah, like a patience, but don't be as entitled as well. Because if you have access to something for so long, you have this expectation and entitlement. And to that same point, absolutely. I think there's always, like, the more something is great, the more of a disparity and dichotomy of something that can be wrong to it. And obviously, the goal is always to spread information. Even Benjamin Franklin, when this country, if you start with just like America, when it was founded, he wanted to create free libraries for all, just to like spread information. You have Elon Musk now, like equivalent to that, trying to do it, but more on a tech scale. So there's no real blueprint on how to use the internet, and there's going to be some bad things that happen with that, but it's like, what an opportunity to have people dive extremely into their niche. And that's why I brought up the quote before, because 7 billion people, there can be 7 billion companies, because
But there isn't.
You're like, not exaggeration, but yeah. Like
I like
that point of like purpose.
I like the idea of awakening people's curiosity.
That's a good.
And giving them the opportunity to explore that curiosity freely and potentially develop themselves further and find ways to be more independent and have their, take control of their own freedoms.
Yeah.
I also feel like not everyone in the world should be or wants to be an entrepreneur, because it's not an easy path and it's not for everybody. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, there's got to be worker bees too. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of people that are super stoked about just like going to their 9 to 5, checking out at 5 p.m., not having to think about work until the next day, not responding to an email until they're back in work. Then like there's something like, hey, I wish I had that ability to be cool with that. It just doesn't do it for me. But there needs to be people like that in the world. There needs to be both. And that's, going back to like balance.
Yeah, the balance is key. And the fact that people have awareness to know what they want is also key. And it'll be interesting to see play out, because there's so many advancements being made. But at the end of the day, it's all about how it's used and how it's abused. And hopefully it's not the latter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but because there was I appreciate, like, as we went, there was a lot of sprinkling of your story, your journey from your grandfather from Israel, or Israel. I know you pronounced it a better way than I did, but and then all the way up until now. I appreciate that sharing of it, but I would ask sort of this looking backwards to those starting out, because those starting out now, it's especially difficult, even though there's an abundance of opportunity in a time when many things are changing. Like, what are your prized possessions with realizations and lessons that you can give to your younger self for others to know of?
I mean, one of the biggest ones that I'm still coming to grips with is that perfection is the enemy of progress. Like, it's really easy, especially if you're an artist or fancy yourself an artist, it's really easy to not make progress on something because you feel like you're not going to execute perfectly. But in most cases, and I'd be hard pressed to find like exceptions, in most cases, it's better to just like give it a shot, get 80% of the result that you want, and then iterate.
Yeah.
Rather than like sit there and brew on it and be like, no, well, I can't quite get to 100%, so I'm not going to do it. I mean, there's the concept in tech of like the MVP, the minimum viable product, which is like, the quickest way to market. And you, in all these like self-help books or all these like tech keynotes, you always hear people that are like, oh, you just got to fail fast. You got to do it. You got to get it out there. And much as I hate like some of these commonly overused phrases, there is something to just like creating a product, even if it's not the product that you want to create just yet. If it's a stepping stone, then that's fine. Like, come to terms with the fact that it's going to be a stepping stone, embrace that, and use that as a jumping off point. Because that is, I mean, just to continue the metaphor, like a stepping stone can also be a jumping off point.
Very true. And I find it so cool that there's a linkage to what we started with, in that writing is a joy for you because iteration is key for it to really be produced well. Same thing with video editing, constant iteration, constant cuts and shifts and transitions. So that's really interesting that, and then coming from like a product point, because you're tech focused as well, that theme is it's just so universal through all facets of your life.
Yeah. I mean, getting back to the internet thing for just a quick second. There is one thing that I wanted to say that I didn't quite verbalize correctly before, and one of the things that gives me the most pause about the growth of the internet and the prominence of the internet in our society, and as that grows to other societies that haven't kind of received or utilized that technology to this point, I feel like any good, healthy relationship needs to have a certain amount of independence between parties. Absolutely. My biggest concern about the internet is that we're becoming way too dependent on it. And like, one of the things that I actually spoke about with my girlfriend was like, could you imagine if at one point during COVID, just like the internet, like for whatever reason, right? Like, let's say they were worried about a panic or something, and they just like flipped the switch. All the service providers stop feeding us internet for like a week. What do you think would happen?
Yeah.
I think the whole city would go crazy. People would be freaking out. Like, the level of dependence that there is right now of people needing their devices and needing technology and needing social media, there's like legitimate addiction, legitimate mental health issues that are coming out of this. I think it's an opportunity for all of us as we look at this technology expanding. There should be an opportunity to look at how it's being used, what can be improved, and getting back to tying it to iteration. It's like, all right, here's early iterations of the internet.
Yeah, because it's still,
has this thing developed its own growth trajectory and its own mind in that, or do we still have control over it? Because if we still have control over it, which I think we do, then like we should think twice about where this is going and how we can make it a healthier platform or a healthier technology for all of the new users and new folks that are going to be harnessing this technology in the future.
Yeah, that was very well articulated, truly. Because it's not like just because the internet's the internet doesn't make it that we shouldn't abide by the same principles that are key to just a healthy life with that independence aspect. And then the one thing I always think of is, Brian Chesky. I said it when we started doing interviews with the start of quarantine for
Airbnb founder.
Yes. Yeah. They're in a weird phase now, but he basically said when they were going through the thick of it, and they still kind of are, he was like, the crisis it brings you back to your roots. So this pandemic is like a nice point of patience and a nice way of bringing the world back to our roots to show what needs to be iterated from a better perspective. Because if the world was still fast-paced and there wasn't any pandemic or recession occurring, we wouldn't be able to make these iterations. So it's like a nice, as you said, a good gap to just like, let's get in there and fix it and then maybe move on and not go straight to AI or AR, VR just yet.
Yeah. And I mean, we're also at a really crucial point in the way we look at education, right? There's, at least in New York right now, there's a lot of controversy around back to school and e-learning
Mm.
and what do classrooms look like. There's a lot of parents who are on the wealthier side of the spectrum who are hiring retired teachers to do little pods, little micro schools.
Oh wow.
And, again, like we're in a place where we're in desperate need of education reform in this country. Like there shouldn't be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people with student debt for a large part of their adult life.
Mm.
There shouldn't be a classroom curriculum that neglects crucial life skills like doing your taxes or like learning how to network or like learning how to uh, learning relationship dynamics, whether it's personal, romantic, or business. Like there are so many hard skills and soft skills that school curriculum doesn't even touch on. And there are so many education formats that are only now being explored. So like, I'm weird because I'm like cynical and occasionally pragmatic to the point of almost pessimism. But I then look at all that and analysis and I'm like, where's the opportunity?
Yeah.
And, it's really easy to look at what's happening right now with COVID and education and be like, man, these kids are really missing out because they're not getting interaction, and schools, like the cities are failing to organize, like to get school back on track in an effective way. But what if we all just took a step back and tried to think about, rather than like getting it back to the way it was,
Mm.
what if this is our opportunity to completely rethink about how education works
Yeah.
for the teachers and for the students?
Absolutely. And it's more than time that conversation is being implemented or is like forced to be implemented. I know we had one person on episode 50 named Tommy Hatton, used to be an athlete all his life, went to UNC, and is now working on a startup called Learn to Win, where they help. It's like a playbook that's broken down into bite-sized chunks for short episode learning or like short duration learning, short spurts. So it's a cool aspect with that. And then we have another person who is starting an edtech app platform where people can barter their knowledge and stuff through that. So there's all these cool little ventures happening. But I mean, you couldn't have put it better with how you said it. And I thought it was really interesting too, your thought process, right? You thought about that. You went from like the cynicism in a way to pragmatic to pessimism to then like reversing that to like where's the problem? Because you want to get the perspective of like the person that's facing the issue.
Yeah, I mean, to unfortunately, I was oftentimes taught to think about worst case scenario, and so that's where my brain goes often.
They say prepare like a pessimist and like think like an optimist or whatever.
Yeah, and so that's actually the exact like the thought process for me is initially like, what if this was to go as bad as it could? And then I think about the scenarios, and then I'm like, okay, and now how can I approach this with a positive attitude and try to create the most positive outcome? Like, where's the opportunity? And sometimes I think having a positive attitude is like half the battle, because that's, you need to understand that it's a possibility for you to make it real.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's a great framework with like fear setting that Tim Ferriss uses. So that way of reverse engineering thinking is really interesting. Shows the tech, shows the creative way of you, but a cool thing people can apply for the listeners that will be flocking when this is out into the internet universe of the world and for all to consume, which is just amazing. What we talked about today. But yeah, I think there was a lot of gems there, but I always like to leave the door open if you wanted to say any last things that are top of mind as we head into the end of 2020, the end of this interview. But I do appreciate having you on.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you as well. It's important to dream big
Yes.
and make a path of actionable steps. Like dream big, but make small steps.
Mm,
Because sometimes if you dream too big, like one of my favorite sayings, and I think this is where I would want to leave it, is that a jug fills drop by drop.
that's going.
It's like an old Buddhist proverb, and it's just this concept. It's along the same lines of like, journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, or whatever that expression is. Um, Start,
Yeah.
like, dream big. I love it, but also start. Like, you are a role model because you're grinding. You're working super hard. You're reaching out to people, talking to as many people as you can, and trying to help tell stories. And you know, I think I have tremendous respect for what you're doing by just grinding it out and continuing to have conversations and like, asking questions
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
trying to learn, and you're already creating amazing products, both your videos and various other endeavors. I look forward to seeing some of the other projects that you mentioned earlier. I won't spoil it just in case it's not supposed to be in this episode,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
For sure.
um
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. And that to that, I mean, from coming from you, especially, that means like the world and more. And you couldn't have said it better. It's like this spectrum of, yes, look high, but then like keep your, like, look at your like feet as well, like step by step. I'm actually gonna absolutely write that down. A jug is filled drop by drop.
one small win every day.
One small win. Yeah, exactly.
Get one small win every single day that somehow applies to what your big dream is, then I think you're constantly moving in the right direction.
Yeah, constant iteration. Maybe that'll be a title that applies to something with that theme will be put on this one. Yeah, but no, man, it's so great. Seriously. Yeah,
Thank you for the opportunity, man, and definitely let's chat again soon. Um,
sure.
Maybe off the record next time,
Yeah,
but
no, we will. We will.
I do appreciate you, and we'll definitely be chatting more.
Yeah, no, that's a certain. But yeah, all the best. Have a good rest of your Sunday night. We'll talk.
Absolutely. You as well, man. Be well.